What is your annual churn rate? How well do you, what is your average lifetime of a customer? Do you bring in customers who stay with you for 1 or 2 rental cycles and then leave? Is that as you scale, your PMs should be doing less and less task work and more relationship work. A well-placed CEO saving the day for a customer can go a long way to building loyalty.
Understand what happened, understand why you're frustrated. Here's what we're doing to fix it. And I think to your point, that goes a long way. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Evernest Property Management Show. I am your host, Spencer Sutton, and it's great to be here with you today. I don't have Matthew Whitaker with me. He is traveling this week, but we had such a great time with Brad Johnson, the CEO of Profit Coach. We decided to bring Brad back on the show because in the first episode, Brad, honestly, we just didn't get to a lot of the things that we had written down to talk about. So I want to get back into those, but welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. Glad to do round 2.
Yes, sir. Round 2. This is going to be good. So, in the last episode, and I want to encourage you, anybody who's listening to this, go back and listen to the last episode. It was really good. We talked about a lot of great things. We talked about financial blind spots, Brad, that you see owners have when they come to you, things like DLER. We talked about that. We talked about ancillary services. And then we also talked about the danger that PM owners face or kind of maybe the misconception when they're chasing doors as a measurement of success versus profit margin. And so I want to kick back off our discussion on this right here because you mentioned you had a client that I think they had 500 doors. They were around 40 plus percent profitability, and they were making around $700,000. So, which that blows my mind. And I'm like, well, of course, everybody should want that business. But, we did talk about it all depends on the person's goals. Do you see a sweet spot? Like what should somebody, if they're trying to figure out their profitability, what are you seeing in normal property management companies? Because that seems like maybe an outlier or the exception as opposed to the rule. So what do you think the rule is?
That's a great question. And I will acknowledge that is outlier, that is exceptional performance, but B and C, it is possible because I'm looking right at it. And C, this gentleman would be the first person to tell you that he's not special. And he's a good entrepreneur, but he's not doing something exceptionally crazy. He's developed really good people. He's developed really good processes. He's developed a great reputation over a long period of time, but that can lead to extraordinary results. So the way that I want to tackle this question is basically by reframing it to, if I was building a property management company from scratch, 0 doors, how would I look? Not saying I have the perfect blueprint or roadmap to growing a PM company, but if I were to analyze it and think through how would I look at door growth relative to profitability in terms of how do I not handicap myself while I grow, but how do I keep an eye on eventually what I want, which again, from our first episode, I think 95% of PM entrepreneurs want a highly profitable self-managing company. They don't want 5,000 doors, even if they think they actually want 5,000 doors. It's usually because they don't realize the fruit of their entrepreneurial dreams that they're really after is actually possible with a lot less than 5,000 doors. So, okay, 0 to 50, 0 to 75 doors, you're not focused on profitability. In fact, you should not be. You have to grow your doors. You have to grow your doors and get to the place where you have enough revenue to pay yourself something. And most importantly, especially if you are the sort of person, as a lot of PM entrepreneurs are, pretty good at sales, pretty personable, former realtor, former investor, you need to focus on growing doors. And you need to grow doors so that you can hire some help, usually through the means of an RTM at first, because that's all you can really afford, to free yourself up to keep growing doors, right? So you do that 0, 50, 60, you hire somebody, you go back down. Maybe you've gotten a little profitable, you hire someone, you go back down close to zero, you kind of do it again, you get a little bit of infrastructure, you keep that cycle going until 150, 200 doors. That's when I would say, all right, you should really be paying pretty close attention to your financial metrics. I think you should pay attention to them beforehand. I think what's more important on the finance side early on than your actual metrics and what they say is, are you doing really good accounting? We touched on this in the first episode as well. I strongly recommend the NARPM chart of accounts. You can save yourself a lot of hassle by just starting your business with the NARPM chart of accounts. They're very clean, they're very concise, and they're standardized, so you can see your performance relative to other companies. And in the NARPM benchmarks guide, we do stratify and segment out a lot of the data by unit count. So you can see if you're in a healthy place relative to people who have a similar unit count to you. But around 200, 150, you should be profitable. You should have some sort of margin, 10%, 15%, where you're healthily growing a profit margin while you're growing your business. And then the sweet spot, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, is I would say 400 to 800 doors. You can have a pretty profitable company at 2 to 300. Around 400, 350, 400, and this is borne out in some recent research Peter Lohman did on profit multiples, revenue multiples, and valuations of a bit of a turning point that happens between 3 and 400, where you have a team that can theoretically do almost everything on your behalf. You start to get to the place where you're a little bit more self-managing, and you're spending your time as the CEO or entrepreneur or executive building the business and focusing on driving revenue, structuring labor, making sure it's really efficient, and growing the business. So 400 to 800, I think, is a place where you can very comfortably play in the 20s in profit margin, which if you're in kind of a standard market, let's say your average rent, $1,500 to $2,000. So you can be driving RPU $200 to $250. You apply a healthy 25% margin to that. That's a pretty profitable business. It's certainly a business where you can pay yourself a salary of 6 figures and have an income $100, $200, $300,000 a year. That's pretty dang good, and it's probably at least what you left on the table, if not more, when you left your corporate job, if that's the move you made. And so you've replaced your income. And like I said, you're starting to get to the place where that valuation really picks up, and you're in a better place to either hold, build your business, make it more self-managing, add doors to an already profitable unit engine, or position yourself to sell and get a really strong valuation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm curious because as you start to grow your company, you mentioned it, you're usually good at sales, you're growing. That tends to be the focus and you're a really good property manager. But at some point, you mentioned becoming like self-sustaining. To me, that indicates that somebody who has started this company has moved from a technician, like they're really good at property management, to now they have to be a manager and a leader of people. How difficult is that transition? Because I just don't think it's like natural for everybody. Do you see that being a problem in businesses you look at?
Yeah, I would say that is probably, I don't know if it's the hardest transition you have to make as an entrepreneur, but it's definitely up there. If you did this how so many folks did this, and so many people listening to this probably did it, you really built it on the back of your own effort, your own grind, your own ability to just sort of will this into existence. And to take that and to delegate much of that side of your brain and that side of your ambition, and to focus on efficiency, focus on profitable growth, that's a really tough transition. And getting out of the PM seat, that, I'm working with a few guys actually in my market right now, just my local Wilmington market, who happen to be clients and friends, to do just that, they're both 150, 200 doors, to step out of that. Okay, I've got a portfolio, and my property manager has a portfolio, and actually transitioning out of running around town, checking on properties, to building a business. I mean, that's a hard transition, especially because you probably have a bit of a sentimental attachment to the work that you've done to get you to this place. So,
And not to mention, a lot of those owners probably have an attachment to you as well, right?
Well,
Because they're used to
yeah.
calling they're used to texting you, calling you, all of that. So that makes it even more difficult.
Especially if you named your company after yourself, which a lot of people do.
That's right.
I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just saying that does make it harder.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it may have helped you in the very beginning, right? Because you're like, hey, I have a somewhat of a name recognition. I've got a social media following, whatever. People try to brand themselves, but then it ends up hurting you when people call and expect to speak to you and they're not getting you anymore.
Right. So there's two difficult transitions. The first one is, are you able to let go and to delegate that work? The second one is, do you have a team capable enough to take that delegation and for you to feel confident that those balls are not going to be dropped and the team can actually pick that up? That's that like 200 to 400 I need to get out of the PM seat. The 400 to 800 up to 1,000 is, and this is the most common conversation I have with people in this bracket is, I'm out of the PM seat, but I am so bogged down being the bottleneck and being the person that everyone comes to for escalated issues that I was able to grow. I got out of the PM seat. I was able to grow the business. I'm now so bottlenecked because the complexity of the business is so great that everything comes to me for a decision that I now am again in a seat where I can't grow the business. And so these are people, speaking EOS language, these are people who just desperately need an integrator. And integrators, COOs, they're pretty hard to find. You have to be prepared to pay quite a bit of money to get them, but a good one, a really good one, can just free up all of that mess and be the buffer between you and just the messiness that is running a PM company, frankly.
Right. And allows you, it kind of frees you up to like focus more on maybe even strategic growth if you want to do that, right. Like acquisitions. That's kind of what Matthew did when we hired we hired a COO a good while ago, but then Graham Robinson kind of came in and filled that position as our president. And then we have a CEO, Matt Patterson, who's fantastic. But it's really interesting because I'm imagining, because you've mentioned a couple of times having a great team. So having really good profit margin, you need to have a great team. And when you're small, generally when you're growing and fighting to grow this business, and you start hiring your first people, you're hiring generalists that can do a lot of different things. But then as you begin to grow, like you're talking about 400 to 800, you need more specialists. Like you need, so that you're not the bottleneck, you need what we found, more specialists to run, which is kind of why we went departmental. You know, we have a leasing department, an accounting department. We've got, just people who are out in the field. But I'm curious, like, how do you, so you mentioned like an integrator. Is that the first person you need to hire beyond like your just typical property manager, or what we would call PMT, which is a property management tech?
Yeah, I depending on your model between portfolio, departmental, pod, I would get sort of the other departments straight before I would hire that integrator. If you do in-house accounting, if you were doing the accounting, you got to get out of the accounting. If your PMs were doing accounting, I recommend you get your PMs out of the accounting. My general take on property management and property managers in general is that as you scale, your PMs should be doing less and less task work and more relationship work. So whether that's owner relationships or tenant relationships, I have a bias towards property managers owning owner relationships. That is the fundamental fiduciary responsibility and relationship in property management. You should not own that. That's too much of a bottleneck for you. Maybe you have a role in that. You probably brought a lot of those people on, but your PM should really own those relationships. And then you should continue to build out your staff. Before you get to this integrator place, you should build out your staff with folks who can handle leasing, tenant customer service, accounting. Perhaps you hire an operations person. I've seen very often that a really solid operations person in that 300, 400, 500 unit company is the sort of person who can become the COO or the VP of ops and sit in that integrator seat. So maybe as you hit that point and you need an operations person who sort of has an eye towards the process of PM. You're hiring somebody that you think you can develop into or already has the raw materials to be that person to take the day-to-day off of your shoulders as you get bigger.
So, and we were talking earlier about this need to grow as you're early on, you're growing. That's a lot of the focus. But let me ask you this. Do you see that when an owner begins to step back and replace themselves with great operators, people, whether it be a PM to take those relationships, is it easier then for owners to fire you? Because I'm just thinking about churn being a big deal as you grow. Like it's easy to add doors, I think, early on because you're so hands-on, but then you have to kind of start focusing on churn because this is a big deal. So do you think it's easier for owners to fire you, and how do PMs typically fix this?
Yeah, that's a really good insight and probably leads to something we should spend some time on, which is an inattention to unit and owner churn. But yeah, that is one of the big risk points as you back yourself out of the day-to-day of managing properties is, hey, owner, I know I've got my name on the door. I own the company. I brought you in 2 years ago, but I have to pass you off to a property manager. I think there's an opportunity there for the owner to reassess the relationship. But if you've done a great job, if you've kept their property clean and occupied, if you've kept it well maintained, and you say, and early on, you really do have to do this. Like, yes, the primary relationship is going to pass to this person. I've put my trust in them. You've put your trust in me. I need you to put your trust in this person. And here's why. Hopefully they're fairly credentialed. But, I am still available to you if you have an escalated concern. If this is not going well, I want to know about it. So I'm not really advocating for a hard break. You were in it and now you're not in it. I'm advocating for more of a gradual transition. Now, I do think you get to a point, and I'm sure you guys have local offices where this is the case. At Sawyer, I had 1,300 plus units. I did get to the point where if you were a single unit owner and you had an issue that you just really wanted to talk to me about, and I knew about it and I had looked through it, I did not take every phone call. I did say sometimes, like, Michelle, who is the director of operations, like, she is capable of handling this and she's going to handle this. And so I'm not going to allow myself to get involved in every single owner tenant dispute. But when you're a little smaller and you are trying to back your way out, I think a hard pass is pretty tough. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, even today, like Matthew will get contacted via LinkedIn or something, or maybe I'll get contacted because they see me on YouTube or something, and they'll say, "Hey, I have this problem." I'm always passing that off to the people who can actually help them. Like Matthew and I can't help anybody. We're not close enough to the business. They're going to be better. Also, to your point, I think probably the best time to pass somebody off to a property manager in the relationship is going to be when they are, when their property's occupied, when everything is good. They're not in the middle of a turn. Yeah. They're not in this like hectic part of the business.
Property's not vacant.
That's right. The property's not vacant. And you're going, hey, I want to introduce you to this person because they're going to handle all your problems. It's probably when everything's going great and you've collected rent for 18 months in a row.
That's a really good point. And one thing I think I'll modify and add to my response is a well-placed CEO saving the day for a customer can go a long way to building loyalty. So I'm not necessarily advocating for zero involvement with owners. I'll give you an example of just one that made a really big impact on me. I was at Broker Owner. One of our coaches was just telling me that one of their clients was just having a really hard time getting onboarded to pet screening, petscreening.com, which is a company I think is great, and they're doing really good stuff. And I was like, well, they said, can you help? I was like, well, I know John Bradford decently enough. And, I see him. He's literally across the courtyard from me. I'll just ask him if he can bring this to somebody senior on his team and get their attention and see if we can resolve this. And I go to John and I say, hey, John, here's the situation. Can you help? And John was like, oh, just give me his phone number. I'll call him myself. and I give my client's phone number to John, our mutual client, and John is, a government official and CEO of a couple different things and an important person. And he just pulls out his phone and calls this person, fixes the problem right away, gets in all the right people. So that made an impact on me. It made an impact on my client, made an impact on his client. And so I do think there's a time and a place for a well-placed CEO fix. But in general, if you take all of those, especially at scale, at the Evernest scale, if Matthew responded to every LinkedIn message, he would never get anything done. And so you have to figure out the highest and best use of your time. It's not solving all your clients' problems.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a great point. And I will say this, as much as I make fun of Matthew and we kind of kid with each other, I did hear him just the other day, literally just the other day, having like my door was open and he had just gotten on the phone and he was apologizing for something to a client. And so that would, to your point, obviously he can't take every call or can't handle every issue, and he shouldn't, but he did pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I just wanted to apologize. I understand what happened. I understand why you're frustrated. Here's what we're doing to fix it. And I think, to your point, that goes a long way.
Yeah, big time.
All right, so let's talk about, we've talked a lot about people, and it really depends on somebody's goal. What do they want to do with their company? Do they want to grow it? But when people come to you and you're helping them get their financial house in order, and then eventually, let's say they're a client of yours for a while, then eventually they say, hey, I'm ready. Like, I want to start thinking about being acquired and selling my business. What are some of the things that you're advising them to do in those instances when they're coming and saying, hey, we're ready to start thinking about this?
Yes. If you are ready to start thinking about that, you should be in the process, or at least start the process of ensuring that essentially everything that you do can be or starts to become being done by, there's a lot of conjugations for you, your team and not yourself. So again, you're an entrepreneur, you built this business, you built it off your own hard work for the most part, I would think. You're used to jumping in and solving problems, or maybe you own sales and marketing, maybe you own these different things. Most acquirers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, at least on your end, most acquirers are looking for a business that at least post-sale operates without the owner. There's often not maybe there's a short stick around period, but you become more attractive to the folks who pay the highest amount when your business is fairly self-managing. So I would say operationally, is your team in a place to live without you? Financially, again, do you, accounting wise, have your house in order? Do you know your metrics? Do you have an idea of what somebody might put before you as an offer? And how easy are you making it for them to value your business? A metric that you may not be paying attention to that you totally should, whether or not you're going to be acquired, but something that I think acquirers are very much looking at is, what is your annual churn rate? How well what is your average lifetime of a customer? Do you bring in customers who stay with you for one or two rental cycles and then leave, which is an indication of pretty poor service, right? A customer lifetime average of 6, 7, 8, 9 years. That's really, I would think, what folks like you are looking for, which is, when I acquire this business, is everybody just going to split and I'm going to be left holding the bag of, no matter what the clawback clause is, holding a bag that's just not worth all that much. So do you know your churn? Are you tracking it? We prefer rolling 12 monthly churn. Rolling 12 churn as a percentage of your whole portfolio, updating that once a month. So in the last year, 12 months ago, you had 600 units, and then now you have, less units. What's the percent that you lost between then and now? Not net, but just from the units you started with to the units you have right now. Obviously, tracking net growth, very, very smart to do as well. But you really want to make sure that the back door on your business is closed nice and tight. It hampers your ability, even if you're not going to sell, it really hampers your ability to grow there's a mathematical limit to your growth based on your churn rate that you just can't do anything about unless you drastically increase your business development efforts, which is really hard, or tighten up your churn rate, which I see usually is much lower hanging fruit.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think if you are in a market, you've done a lot to grow, and there's only probably so many things you can do to generate leads in your market, right? So at some point, companies kind of flatline in a market where they're like, hey, we're doing everything, unless you're going to go out and hire more, to your point, BDMs, and they're out, beating the street, which is expensive. The best thing to do is just focus on churn and figure out how to keep them going out the back door.
Yeah, it's cheaper and easier to keep a door than it is to gain a door.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, by a lot.
As I was thinking about like what we tend to be thinking about from Evernest standpoint, from an acquirer standpoint, we have essentially two avatars that we are looking for when we're purchasing a company. And there have been some exceptions to this, but typically the people who sell to us are either retiring, they're leaving the business altogether, and they're ready to, retire and hang out and do whatever, or they have their eye on starting another business, and maybe they want to go back into real estate in some other form, but they're just ready to get out of the property management business. They still have a lot of maybe a time left on their entrepreneurial journey, and they wanted to get started doing something else. So those are the two people. So we're typically not looking for people to come and hang out with Evernest. And to your point, getting the business ready so that it can run without you is really important. Some other things that we look at are that people can do something about. So if you're an owner and you're thinking, hey, I want to sell in 2 to 3 years, here are some things that you can impact probably. And that's going to be concentration, like client concentration. We don't want a large client concentration. If 10%, 20% of your portfolio is made of one client, that's going to be a problem for us. Another thing are Google reviews. Average rents are going to be big for us as far as, we're in investor markets, and so we get those markets very well. We started that way, but that doesn't mean we want to come into a city and be in Class D areas all the way. So that's not as attractive to us.
Yeah, and those are all really good. Another one that I would add is consistency in the property management agreement. So first of all, are your agreements assignable? Because if they're not assignable, then you're going to have a really hard time selling your company to somebody who cannot take your agreements. Now, if they do a full stock sale purchase of your business, that may not be as much of an issue as an asset sale where they buy the contracts. But just in general, especially the bigger companies who are doing, like you guys, doing a pretty thorough due diligence analysis, it's much easier. Again, it's making yourself attractive to sell, making it easy to facilitate a transaction like this so a buyer doesn't get spooked and leave. One of the ways that you can do that is by everyone being on the same PMA. Maybe they don't have exactly the same fee schedule, which is not ideal, both for you as an operator to not know what, are all units going to produce the same amount of revenue relative to average rent? I think they probably should for the most part. Maybe you have some scale up and down with your management fees based on how many units the owner has or what the average rent is. Kind of a different topic for a different day. But particularly on the legal side, have you been updating that legal language? State regulations change substantially. In some states, they change every year. In most states, they're getting tighter. So is your legal language up to date, or are your PMAs just getting updated once a year only for new clients? And so you have this mishmash of all of these different things that you're forcing the acquirer to do some legal risk underwriting that they otherwise wouldn't have to do, which is gumming up the works and making it a more frustrating experience. If you had just had I recommend an annual PMA update. When a tenant signs anything, a renewal or a new lease, the owner signs a new PMA that's in conjunction with that lease. It can be just an addendum that modifies but brings everything into compliance, or it can be a brand new PMA and you just highlight for them anything that's new. But if you have uniformity across your PMAs, I would think that's a pretty substantial way to sort of delever the risk and make it a smoother transaction.
Yeah, 100%. We've seen everything across the board. I mean, we've seen some really bad PMAs that it's amazing what people have because they don't update them, they don't check them, right. And so it does hamper some of the due diligence and probably hampers your ability to sell at the price you want.
Yeah, and when in doubt, just use your state form. Like yeah. I'm all about a custom PMA that's got the things that you care the most about written out. But these state PMAs, they're generally pretty good.
Something, and this kind of goes into the same point. We bought a company from he's now our Chief Revenue Officer, our CRO, Steve Brown. And Steve's a great guy. He had a company in Tampa. We bought his company, and I remember we were interviewing him on a webinar one time, and we were like, Steve, what would be your advice for people who are thinking potentially about selling down the road in a couple, 2-3 years? And he said, what I wish I would have done probably sooner is get all of these things in order. Just being prepared, getting my financials in order, getting them all, buttoned up, because, when it's time to sell, that's not a good time to start doing that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. You should start before you're even thinking about it.
So Brad, let me ask you as we kind of think about wrapping up here, what's your typical client? Like who typically comes to you? Is there, I'm guessing there's probably not a door count number, but what are they seeking to achieve the most? Like what are their biggest pain points?
It's a great question. And we have some ICPs and some personas as well. I would say at the top of the list is, I have built this company. I have 200 to 1,000, 800 to 1,000 units, somewhere in kind of this. I made it past the hump, and I'm in this middle land. I'm paying myself a decent wage. I'm living a decent lifestyle, but I'm not experiencing any of the entrepreneurial wins that I want. I don't have freedom of time. I don't have freedom of money. My business is making 5, 6, 7, 8%. Maybe 10%. Rarely is it 15%. Usually it comes with I've heard of you guys. I've read some of your work. I've talked to some of your clients. I know that there are people out there. I know that the top quartile has hit this 32% profit margin. I literally don't understand how that's possible. Can you help me? And of course, the answer for us is yes, we can help you. We are not consultants. We are coaches. We have a proven process and a really solid methodology behind this, but ultimately you are going to be the one who has to do the work to get your company to 30%. We are not going to come in. We're not coming on site. We're not training your staff. We will show you the way, and we will show you the playbook and show you the roadmap of how successful companies do this, because we've done the research and we see what it takes, and we have quite a bit of accumulated best practices. But ultimately, our goal is to empower you to build that yourself and to get to that place, and we'll be your partner. There's quite a bit of accountability built into that relationship, but that's usually it. Is if only I could get more time and more money. And sure, everybody wants more time and more money, right? Everybody wants that, but there is another side of that, and that's actually something that it really excites me about our industry and the way that it's matured in the last 10 years. I'd like to think we've had something to do with that, but there's now this cohort of people. I could name you 30 to 40 names of people who have built, like the client I mentioned, on the last podcast that you brought up here, who have built these highly profitable self-managing companies, and they're kind of ready to figure out what's next for them. Sometimes they're looking to sell, start something else, or how can they take what they've built and steward it well and pass it along and give back to their community, empower their employees. How can they challenge themselves to be something more than just a wealthy entrepreneur, somebody who leaves a legacy, somebody who has a renewed focus on health and their faith and their family. They spent 10, 15, 20 years grinding it out. And now they're at the place where they're like, well, I really want to make sure that I'm stewarding this well and using this wisely. So there's both of those, right? Like our client base is 70% the former and 30% the latter, because we've worked with a lot of folks over a number of years and taken them from average to benchmark, right? 8, 10% to 30%, helped them build a self-managing team and a strong leadership team. And now we're working with them on, all right, what's next? What does the next chapter look like for me?
That sounds fantastic, Brad. So what is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Because I think this is fantastic. Like what you're describing and the way you all help people is what I feel 99% of the PMs out there want and need help with. So how do people typically get in touch with you?
Sure. I mean, the best thing would just be to reach out to me directly. Like I said, a well-placed CEO solve can go a long way, and I'm happy to be the front door for you into Profit Coach if that interests you. My email is brad@pmprofitcoach.com, or if you just go to pmprofitcoach.com, you'll see an ability to book a meeting, and that meeting is with me.
And if you want to find out more, like dig in, they've got great information on their website, but you also have some webinars you do once a month, correct? Talk real quick about that.
Yeah, it's called the Profit Power Hour. It's how many years are we in? I think we're in season 4, season 5. So we do a monthly webinar, 4th Wednesday of the month, every month, on different financial and operational topics. And our ambition is to bring you really good, actionable, strategic things that you can use in your business. We always have panelists. They're not sort of monologue type presentations. So smart people, and then Spencer Sutton shows up once every now and again to
the exception to the case of smart people. I just show up. Matthew wasn't available, so I joined.
We did a really good one on how to exit without selling. We brought a couple people on who had successfully kind of exited the day-to-day without selling their business. And then we did a part 2 of how to exit by selling. And we had you, and we had Kit Garrett, and we had Peter Lohman. And both of those were some really, really good content that I think answered a lot of questions. Some of the most common questions we get around this: how do I finish this? I've built this. How do I finish this well, whether it's a hold or a sell? Usually what it is a hold and then the opportunity for a sell. If you do a great job building and holding and you've optimized, that is attractive to acquirers, and you often get maybe offers that you weren't expecting or even soliciting.
Definitely groups that we're trying to buy.
Yes.
Right? That's right. Who we're looking for. I promise you that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Brad, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on this podcast for part 2. We finally got the audio worked out. You did a great job. And I just encourage everybody, if you want to reach out, learn more, we'll put all the information in the show notes. You can check it out there. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Evernest Property Management Show.
Thanks so much.